this was a bipartisan effort and with much input from several representatives from both sides of the aisle. Through you.
Representative Simowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for his answer. And I think that was really important to point out. And I know I thanked her privately, but I want to thank her publicly here in the chamber. Representative Rosa Rebimbas was very helpful to this and spent many hours of her time sitting with the representatives working through the language. And I always do want to point it out, and I truly do appreciate her efforts. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I too wanted to thank all of the parties that put in tireless hours into the legislation that's before us, and that goes all the way back from the towns who have had their experiences and struggles that came all the way up during the public hearing to participate in the task force and the public hearing to share those stories, as well as the towns that did not suffer any negativity and are perfectly happy with the current systems that they have. I think by hearing from both sides, we were able then to better articulate and put together the amendment that's before us and trying to strike a balance between the two. And I also agree, as many of the speakers have said previously, I think we did just that in the bill that's before us. I also want to again acknowledge and also thank the Majority Leader for his acknowledgement of the work that went into this from members on both sides of the aisle, because it's also truly, and this is, I don't want to remiss by not saying this, but it is the leadership of the other side that has allowed us to have a voice at the table, not only representatives from both sides, but senators as well, and also all the interested parties and players. And this is very unique. It does not happen very often, but in fact it did happen in this piece of legislation, even literally up to almost minutes before this piece of the amendment was filed and came onto this House floor. We were still out in the hall having discussions with the Department of Public Health regarding, again, the nuances of this amendment. So I think all the way through we have given an opportunity for everyone to have a voice. And I do believe that this is a good piece of legislation that's before us. I do want to point out that certainly perception versus reality are two very different things that we need to make sure that we're looking at. I understand that those towns who are happy and content with the situations that they currently have, I would submit to them that the amendment that's before us will allow them to maintain that. There is nothing in this amendment that's going to change that. But I also understand then when they're comfortable in what they have, they don't want to accept changes, because change is sometimes the unknown. It leads to fear. And sometimes, quite frankly, a lot of legislation up here, sometimes that does happen. Well, once again, I'll certainly say, and it's something that we have said when we were negotiating this amendment, if there is anyone who is negatively impacted that was not considered or something that we left behind, we're certainly prepared in order to address that. But the reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, we do have towns who have struggled. And it's just not financial struggles, and I do want to certainly clarify that there is not any financial factor in this bill that stands alone as a financial factor. We took the consideration and time to actually say that quality of care must be considered no matter what. So there is not a standalone financial factor. But the reality is, for those towns that are struggling currently in their situations, we have heard devastating stories. Stories at which the patients are not being properly transported, cared for, and even, the worst, certainly we heard stories of a death. These are things that we have a responsibility then to address. What the amendment before us does is set out some clear guidelines, protocols, factors, responsibilities, timelines that municipalities as well as any EMS company must abide by. And this way it's cleared and spelled out so that people will have their voices heard. There is nothing in this legislation that shuts anyone out. The municipality has a voice. The current EMS provider has a voice. And I actually would say it's an equal voice. I think there was some good questions that's been posed, and I think actually I'm going to just inquire to the proponent of the amendment just one question that one of our representatives on this side had that I promised I would make sure to inquire. So through you, Mr. Speaker.
Please prepare yourself, Representative D'Amico. Please proceed, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So through you, Mr. Speaker, there's thresholds that appear on line 71 and also line 78. And that's under the definitions of what would be considered unsatisfactory performance as well as performance crisis. Those thresholds appear as not less than 50% under the performance crisis and 80% not less than 80% threshold on the unsatisfactory performance. The question to the proponent of the bill would be who developed or who came up with those proposals of thresholds? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative D'Amico.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that those thresholds were negotiated in the process in a bipartisan fashion with all the parties that were involved in the discussions. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Rebimbas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in my conversations with the representative that wanted me to ask that question, even she was surprised at why the threshold would be at least 50% or 80%, thinking in her mind, those are actually unacceptable. Why are we waiting for those thresholds to be so high? But again, it was a threshold that was established, but maybe one more satisfaction or comfort to the companies that are out there that we're not looking to make drastic changes. We're looking for better quality of care. And that was something that was kept in mind all the way through the negotiation of the bill that's before us. I also do want to make sure that I also address the volunteers that are out there in this regard, because that's something that was repeated over and over again during our negotiations. It was always a factor that was taken into consideration, and I think it's absolutely amazing the fact that we do have volunteer services, and we would like to continue to do that, because whether you're a volunteer or you're an employee of an existing EMS, these are people that live in your community. There is absolutely no intent whatsoever to, eliminate that. We want to make sure that we're providing for the individuals that are in our community, not only through the quality of care, but again to maintain our volunteers who literally could be putting their lives on the lines on many of these things and taking themselves away from their families. So again, there's no intent in this bill to negatively impact that. What we're trying to do is reach a better than acceptable threshold of quality care that was kept in the consideration and negotiations of this amendment. And Mr. Speaker, although I do believe it's very easy, and I understand those that might vote against this because of the fear of change, I would seriously encourage you to please take the time, read through this amendment, and just based on your reading, I could assure you that you will see that there is not any one side that comes out as the winner. It's striking a balance of evenness and fairness, and that would be throughout the state of Connecticut. So, Mr. Speaker, I do stand in support of the amendment before us and ask that the Chamber support it.